Hi, welcome back to the Misadventures podcast. I'm Brittany
Welcome
Shulman.
back. And I'm Paula Marie Herbert.
So we are coming off of just getting the news that we have a 46th president.
It's over.
Hopefully, prayerfully, but anyway.
We kind of know who 46 is.
So if you haven't been paying as much attention, they did announce Saturday that at this point, mathematically speaking, Biden is the 46th president. They pretty much called it. Even though all the votes haven't been counted, we know that in places like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, mail-in ballots can be counted up to November 12th when they come in. So, but statistically speaking, mathematically speaking, we have President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Woo!
Let's just give her a round of applause because
round of applause. Which
I saw a meme and it showed all of the vice presidents, and then there's Kamala, and I'm just like, it gave me chills, and I started bawling because
it's amazing. I mean, let's. It's been so long. It's been so long, and we've never had any female represent us in that highest capacity, in those highest capacity offices. So that's amazing and wonderful, and I'm very excited for that win. I'm very excited that it's the first African American in that office. I'm very excited that it's the first Asian American in that office and the first woman in that office. She's knocking down several firsts at once, and it's beautiful. It's sad it's taken this long, but it's beautiful. It's so beautiful to see that happen. And, I'm here for it. I don't care what anyone says. I'm here for it. So how are you feeling about it?
You know what? In this election, and I'm just going to give a round of applause again to all the people of color. I'm sorry. This is just such an emotional thing for me because my nation, with the Apaches and the Native voters in Arizona, were given credit for flipping Arizona. And
well, it was actually on CNN, and it was Van Jones who really broke down some of those numbers, and I actually wrote them down because I want to put it into perspective. Just Navajo Nation in Arizona, there are about 86,000 registered voters. Navajo Nation, they had 89% turnout rate, which is unheard of and amazing. Let me also just let you know that of that, 74,000 voted for Biden and 2,000 voted for Trump. That is a huge push, and why Arizona flipped blue. If you looked at every single state that was kind of up in air, like Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, they all have, North Carolina, they all have really high Native American populations. And it was really disappointing to see us labeled as something else. For those of you who weren't watching CNN and who weren't watching native Twitter, just go hashtag something else and go look at Twitter. It was hilarious, therefore, and sad. What had happened was, it's a good story. You start what had happened. What had happened was CNN put up this poll to kind of show the racial breakdown of voters early on. I think this may have been Thursday, Friday. What day is it? It was last week. So, and what it showed, it was like white voters, black voters, Latino voters, something else, Asian voters.
We weren't even at the bottom.
Well, the thing is, something else is first. Well, let me just back up even more. We need to really grasp and understand what race and ethnicity is in the United States, because often we conflate the two. And Latinos are not a race; they're actually an ethnicity, and they come from multiple countries and have. So, just to lump all of these people into this big lumpy category, it doesn't make sense. But then this something else, they didn't even put other. I mean, it was very dehumanizing, which was what I really felt, was that you couldn't. I mean, again, other at least acknowledges we're other people. Something else. What were we, a SpongeBob SquarePants? I mean, were we a bottle? What was it? What was something else? It was very dehumanizing.
Right. And it just what really got to me too was it got on screen. So how many eyes saw it? How many people, why didn't it, I'm sure it started somewhere and it's like how many eyes saw that and was like, "Oh, okay, we'll sign off on this." And nobody at CNN what like was like, "Oh no, 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 like we need a better word for it," right? And it's just, and that doesn't just include um American Indian, Native Americans, that includes Polynesian, um uh all sorts. It just, yeah, it's very dehumanizing. It's an erasure of who we are as people.
Yeah, and it's another example of indigenous invisibility, and which is our topic for today: misadventures in indigenous invisibility. Because the stories we are about to share, if you have a native friend, you probably don't even know you have a native friend, or that there are native people around you. We're everywhere. We're dog biting everywhere. But I can guarantee you they've had or some sort of similar experience in their life. So, Indigenous invisibility is the continuance. Is part of that tragic native, like all the natives are dying out, all the natives are gone. It's like President Jimmy Carter, who used to say, "We've been in Georgia since the Indians left." The Indians didn't leave Georgia. There are still natives in Georgia, and also, Trail of Tears. But that's neither here nor there. It's why people get so surprised to know that I'm from North Carolina. My tribe is about 45 minutes from the Atlantic. We joke and call ourselves the tribe that didn't move. Um, but people get really shocked and surprised to know North Carolina has the largest Native American population east of the Mississippi, that there are still that many natives there, that there are natives in Mississippi, and all these other places. And it's because we're often labeled as other, because we're often not counted or included when it comes to statistics, when it comes to scholarly work, because our numbers are so small that we're statistically insignificant. And this dog biting election if it has shown nothing, we are not statistically insignificant. We're flipping whole states.
Thank you. Thank you. We pushed this election and we did it. I mean, we did it on sheer, and like, not to even mention that a lot of our native communities got hit hard by the pandemic. I mean, let's just remind folks that we're still in the middle of a pandemic,
Right?
and we're still in the middle of the pandemic. But for our communities to show up and show out while also fighting a very deadly virus, it just goes to show, like, I will tell sometimes I get this, I don't know if you get this in your community, well, my vote doesn't count, my vote doesn't matter. Well, this election has showed that every native vote matters, and that we
Mm-hmm.
have such a strong influence on the swing vote, and how our voices were just, I'm so proud. I'm sorry, I just can't even get my thoughts together sometimes. I am so proud of our native communities
Yes.
because we did this. Our Black and our native communities, we did this.
Absolutely. And so we wanted to share with you guys a few stories of the instances where we have been invisible. Um, and just talk about the fact that these, again, our stories are not unique. Our stories are not they're not unique to our community. And not only are they not unique, it's probably any And you could correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, or share your story in the comments if you're a non-native person who is not doesn't happen to be black or white, or if you're in one of those um, something else categories, how it's often overlooked, how you're often overlooked or you're lumped into. My earbud keeps falling out. I think it's because I should show off my beautiful earrings here.
Ooh, that's some native bling right there.
Right? But
That's some serious
so
native bling.
these are made by uh not Elena, her sister Brianna. Beading Therapy, I
Oh,
think's her Instagram.
oh, those two, that family right there, that's where I go for all my beadwork. But I
Yeah.
also noticed they match your top.
Another sister. Speaking of Indigenous invisibility, I love wearing this shirt out. It says Indigenous. It's the Barbie. I don't know if the color is coming up. It's like the cute little Barbie pink color. Indigenous. I like wearing this out and just being like, yes, I am. Let me tell you. So, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
I can go first. uh, so and for our viewers, like I grew up in on the Navajo Nation. I'm Misadventures of a Rose Girl. That's my channel, and we moved up to a border town, Kirtland, New Mexico, and it's very small. I'll put the population down in our little box down there, just so you can kind of catch what I'm dropping. And so going there, as a matter of fact, when I went to UNM, I was telling a professor where I grew up and what school I went to, and she apologized to me. And this is a native professor, and she says, I am so sorry. We did a study there, and there's a lot of divisiveness in those schools. And this is Kirtland schools, right? And I'll call them out because it's just been a history of stuff. And I have been on the honor roll since I was in kindergarten. I made straight A's. I was a
Girl, you
major, like
smart. You're so smart.
I is smart. You know what I mean? And so when I got to high school, and we were in my junior, like the high school kind of talk, they talk to us in freshman year, sort of, but junior and senior year is full of college stuff, right? I mean, just full of college stuff. In the time that I was a junior and I was a senior, not one person in that school talked to me about college. Not one. A straight A student. Um, I was involved in different clubs and everything. And, they had college fairs and I would go just because it was it was always expected of me, and I just think about everybody who slips through the cracks, whose family isn't as involved, right? Good students whose family may not really expect that of them. And I was always okay, I'm gonna get done with high school, let's go to college. I think that I would have been able to go to a nice, well-known I did UNM, sorry, University of New Mexico. I ended up with you guys and I loved it, every minute of it. But there were probably a wide array of options for me as an A student who applied herself and was involved in extracurricular activities. And so I ended up going to San Juan College, and again, it was great because it was close to home. Higher success rate of college graduates if they start at a local school.
Mm-hmm.
But it was expected of me. I wasn't gonna graduate high school and get a job. It was, you're gonna graduate high school, work, and go to school and get a college degree. It's always been like that in my family. But the fact that you have a student who excelled, and not one time was I ever called into a counselor's office. I never went on any of the college trips. I always wanted to go, and I never knew how to sign up for those to go tour colleges or go to the college fairs.
I'm
And
gonna assume something here, and you can correct my assumption. Weren't you in the honors classes?
yeah, I was in
Yeah,
AP English and
yeah. So
literature. Yeah.
and so even and this is as someone who came out of education. So even as a honor student making all A's, no one approached you and said, "Hey, maybe you need to fill out this application. Have you done your FAFSA? We're
No.
going to have." There was none of that for you.
No. And as a matter of fact, the day that I graduated, so I hit a rough patch in my last year. Again, the invisibility part of it. I hit a rough patch. No, there was no connection of the connection between this is a student who's been consistently our star student, lovely person. There was never a connection of she has completely dropped off and she's got like just where is she? What's happening? Why are her grades like this? There was nothing in that capacity because I did hit a rough patch. And we'll talk about that in a future episode. But when I graduated high school, or right before I graduated high school, I went to San Juan College myself. I filled out all the paperwork and did all the entrance exams so they can place me. Of course, I got high scores. The only place I don't excel is in math. But, I didn't have to take a lot of the prerequisites because I was very smart. And just that whole narrative of we have a great student. Something happened here, did not set any alarm bells off, didn't set any, and my mom's an educator.
Yeah, see that doesn't it doesn't make sense because well, as a teacher, you knew the kids whose parents were also teachers. Not to say that because a lot of times it was those parents that were also the more involved parents or would come talk to you or couldn't figure out why their child wasn't doing well when they weren't doing anything. But yeah, so that's amazing. That's an amazing experience. No, yeah. That no one ever had that conversation with you. No one ever did that.
Yeah, or even recognized the fact that I did work hard and that, there was a lot of stuff going on at home but like, you see these students going off. I always wanted I was like, what, it's really sad because it was always like, well, why am I not good enough? Like, I feel like I have just as good of grades. I feel like I work just as hard, and it was just, I always felt very invisible in that school district. And like, again, my mom couldn't be involved very much because she worked 35 minutes away. She was the same hours as the school was open. She had to work, and how teachers are. She was in her classroom 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And it's just a lot. I feel like my mom did everything that she possibly could. And I'm glad because if there wasn't that expectation and my great parents, um, I don't think I would have ended up in college if I hadn't done that, and so that's just my invisibility story. And so, I mean, it's just, I grew up thinking that it was because I was Native and the color of my skin that people didn't really notice my achievements until I went to San Juan.
Yeah. Well, Carol, I got so many. But the one I want to talk about in particular, I was maybe either in middle school, I was either like 8th, 9th, 10th grade, somewhere around there. So my family was heavily involved in 4-H. I mean, my grandmother started the first Native American club back in the 60s because my mom and my uncles were part of 4-H. So this was like a whole family thing. We were very involved with 4-H. We were very involved with our club. We were very involved with 4-H Congress, which is like that annual convention in North Carolina. So like all the different clubs from all over the state would come to 4-H Congress. That would happen to NC State because they couldn't go to A&T. Another story there. So we would all go to NC State. We'd do these different, there were all these different classes and, or workshops you could take. And one was on racial healing. And I don't think it was called that. It was like anti-racism, I think it was whatever Bill Clinton's initiative was. That's what it was, because this was the 90s. This was the 90s. Anywho, just dated my own self. So I was in, we're all sitting on the floor in a circle with our presenters. And for the most part in North Carolina, 4-H is very white. I mean, it was very white then. And it didn't matter which county you were from. It was very white. There were a handful of African Americans, and then we were about the only Native American clubs that were functioning. There were a few like in the county next to us, Robeson County, but for the most part, when I went to 4-H Congress, I was usually the only Native. If it wasn't me, it was me and my brother. That's how we ran. So we went, I was in this anti-racism conference. They're sitting in a circle, and they had this pile of cutesy little like McDonald's toys in the middle. And part of the exercise, the first exercise, was to choose one of the toys in the middle and then introduce yourself and tell us why you chose that toy. So I just kind of looked and perused. I was looking all over. So there we go. It was this little plastic cheapo generic-y totem pole, and I picked that. Yeah. And so it got to be my turn. I was like, yeah, my name, and I'm most people don't realize that I'm Native American, and there are a lot of Native Americans in North Carolina, and that's why I chose the totem pole. This is the only thing I could think that really speaks to my identity, even though this is not something that we used here. Gave them a whole history lesson. And the presenter, bless her pea-picking heart, and this is the first time I'd ever heard of this. She said, I see you and I feel you. Because I am a white passing, it wasn't white presenting, it was white passing Mexican woman. And most people don't see me as Mexican either. And I was like, wait, what do you mean white passing? I'm not passing. I am not engaged in being anything other than who I am. This was all in my little head. And it made me feel, I was like, wait. So up until I said something, y'all didn't know I was Indian. And I always knew that because, I'm a little pasty. My father is white. So I swim closer to that gene pool. I look like my people, and I go both sides. And so I was like, wait, so you didn't even, so even me saying I'm Native American, but you don't look Native American, therefore you're not Native American. I was like, oh, that's how this works. I was so, and it's probably one of the reasons, because I grew up in my Native community, because I grew up in St. James, for those of you playing the home game on Webb Road, those of you who don't know, now you know, that I very much knew who I was. I mean, I lived in the same house with my Native American grandparents. I knew who I was. I knew my stories. I knew my traditions. I knew where I came from. But in that moment, I was like, oh, so this really doesn't, so even me telling you doesn't even matter right now. Okay. I see you and I feel you. I'm like, oh, okay. And so that was a moment was like, okay. So even me educating isn't enough because I don't look like the stereotype. And then I have another story, which happened a little later in high school. We had this class called Teacher Cadet because I was going to be a teacher. At some point, I finally figured out that's what I wanted to be. And it was a high school class. There were 8 of us in the class. There's the camera. 8 of us in the class. So there was one girl, one African-American girl, 2 Native American girls, 1 white male, and the rest of them are white girls. And we had this really cool activity. We had this scavenger hunt, and we got to go to Toys R Us in Wilmington. That was and leave school and do this. This was so awesome and so much fun. So it was all about multiculturalism. That's what we were doing. Is basically the teacher cadet at high school was basically an education class at the college level. So we had this scavenger hunt, and we had to go find how many science toys there are. Are there any? And the question that stuck out to me was about multiculturalism of dolls. How many different dolls are there? How many dolls represent different cultures? Now, went into this knowing there won't go unless Barbie had released their little Indian doll that year, there wasn't going to be a Native American doll. And even then, it probably wasn't going to be on those shelves. But it was really interesting to see that just 45 minutes away, just over in Wilmington, which has a large African American population. I think there were like 2 or 3 African American dolls, and then the rest of them were all white. There was no Hispanic, there were no Latinos, there were no nothing. And then I'm saying those words to reference the dolls that I could have seen. So as we're riding back, we're talking about all our little findings and what we saw and what we see. And so we got to that question about the dolls. And he said, what do you think that means? That there were only like 2 or 3 African American dolls. And I said, it means I don't matter. It means I don't exist and I'm not important. I'm not important enough for you to put a doll up. And it was when I said you, and I didn't realize this until years later, one of my classmates, one of the white girls, literally said, that's not what it means. That's not what it means at all. And then she went on this rampage of, if my child, I am dating a Puerto Rican. And so like, if my child wants a doll, I will get her any doll she wants, even if it's a black doll. I was like, let's talk about this statement a minute. I'm telling you how I feel going into a store. If I was looking for a doll for my child, there's not one. There wasn't one. There wasn't anything. The standard doll was blonde hair, blue eyed. The standard Barbie was blonde hair, blue eyed. That's the standard. And not blonde haired, blue eyed, despite my ends here. Not blonde hair, blue eyed. So that it was and we literally had a yelling match. Now I know it was her white fragility and I was calling her a bad person. I wasn't calling her a bad person. I was calling the system that wasn't producing enough pretty dolls. And by pretty, brown, any level of brown. There was nothing that represented, and I remember my professor, but it was a teacher, Mr. Mayo, pulled me to the side after, because I was mad. I was hot. I'm like, I'm telling you, I feel invisible. This is how I feel. I am not seeing myself, and therefore I'm not important. Literally, I was at that level. I was yelling. I was mad. I was so mad and so hurt. And he pulled me to the side, and God, if you're a teacher, don't do this. He said, Brittany, she'll never understand. No matter, you can yell at her all you want. You can explain to her. She'll never get it. And the reason she'll never get it is because she's never been a minority. I was like, Mr. Mayo's a white man, by the way. He was a hippie. He was a legit hippie. I love this guy. He had an earring in his ear. That's how much of a hippie. That was like wild.
In the 90s, that was like, woo.
Well, in the 90s, for a middle-aged man to have an earring in his ear, that was like wild. He said, I know how you feel because I was in Africa and I was the only white man around. I was like, your Peace Corps experience is not the same, Mr. Mayo.
No, it is not.
Because at the end of the day, you still got to go back in your whiteness.
Yeah, I'm going to second your statement. Please don't do that as a teacher.
Don't do that.
Because, I just don't see how it is our responsibility. And I find this very, as part of an invisibility thing, because we're so invisible, I feel like we're consistently unpacking. Right? that we're
Yes.
consistently educating and that we're consistently like why is it our responsibility to teach you who we are? I mean, shouldn't that be the education system
Here's the thing, and this is
responsibility?
something that, and this is part of the invisibility piece, is that our history books, at least, well, my mom would talk about, she said, honey, we didn't even get a paragraph. They didn't even acknowledge there was Indians. I was like, at least in my history book, they did acknowledge uh, there were people here. They were great and friendly people. And then the Trail of Tears happened and they're not here anymore. I'm like in North Carolina looking at it going, I'm still here. My grandma's still here. My grandpa's still here. I mean, like all my cousins are still here. So that didn't quite correlate or make sense. And it didn't, yeah. So and then my sister's textbook, her history textbook, we got an acknowledgement of, yeah, there are some Indians here, and it listed out these are the tribes. And I was like, yay, and then nothing. I mean, absolutely. There are like huge gaps in our history of there were some Indians, then there weren't some Indians, then there kind of were some Indians, and then there weren't Indians, and then maybe there's some Indians now, maybe. Yeah, so that was, but in that moment of telling someone this is how I feel, and them completely negating it because it doesn't fit in with their understanding of the world, that was another level of invisibility. It's, I'm telling you who, and you can't even hear me. You don't see me and you can't hear me. So it was very frustrating.
And then you have another person who is supposed to be a confidant, an ally, or hopefully as a teacher, we would hope, making excuses for her.
I never thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. He didn't keep her back. He didn't keep her back after class and say, Kristen, would you like to I mean, he didn't even keep both of us back. He kept me back and told me and had this conversation with me. And I'm like, dude, and frankly, that moment I was too mad to hear or internalize how wrong that was. That it's your, and I think he was just trying to give me tools for not being so hurt. But it's you're. This is the cause of the pain is not how I feel about someone causing me pain. The cause of the pain is the fact that we just did this activity that amplified that invisibility, and then experience this person saying, but no, that's not what it is. No, that's exactly what it is. And I was, yeah. So that's another one of my invisibility stories. And it didn't stop because, girl, college.
I thought,
Hashtag college.
well, let's just, I mean, we're talking about high school. We're talking about, I don't want to say how long ago these were because, we're going to go that out.
I already
But
said the 90s.
but our experience, but the thing is that we have held these, not only are we consistently unpacking for people, but we're also getting these little microaggressions through our whole life. And for me, like, I mean, girl, I already question myself 20 times a day. But to get sort of like an outside validation that you're not good enough to go to college, you're not good enough to go to these college fairs, you're not good enough, like it kind of like think it almost is as if I feel like sometimes I was like, I'm going to show you. You're not going to give me all these opportunities. You're not going to show me. I'll do it myself. You know what I mean? And so I mean, I went to San Juan College. Thank goodness. Okay, so like really side note, um, and if anybody's on our listeners are thinking about going to San Juan College, yes, do it. It is a wonderful, wonderful place to go. I feel like it was helpful in my long-term success in college. When I graduated with my bachelor's at the University of New Mexico. I ended up in Albuquerque, leaving home. It was hard. But the fact that we are still to this day hurt by those things, and that's just one instance. Mine was one situation, and to this day there's still a form of disappointment, and I feel like I always knew there was something wrong with it, right? I always knew there was something not right. But it wasn't until probably college and AIO that I realized that that was racism.
Yeah. That is it's the system is designed for us to be invisible, because for us to be alive, and I say us as Indigenous peoples, as Native peoples, as the first peoples of this land, whatever you want to call yourself or us, um, that we have to be invisible, we have to be gone. Otherwise, you have to acknowledge that um, this land was stolen, that horrific atrocities were committed to and against people, and you have to reconcile that within yourself. And I feel like, and I was listening, I was looking up, because there's this writer, Austin Channing Brown. She is a Black writer, and I forget the name of her book, which was really, really good. No, maybe it's right here.
We can link it
I'm
in
Still
the
Here. Yeah, we'll put
down
it in the
here.
comments too. I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness. She was just on a podcast, and I was listening to her talk about, she in this book, she actually goes through her day and each little microaggression, and how she responds and reacts in those each of those microaggressions. And that's how I feel like Native people it's not always a direct, like, let me just talk to you about, taboo and how he feels about it. It's more of those, which is what my let me tell a story. So in college, we were watching, I think it was the Grammys that year. It was the same year that Justin Timberlake snatched the Janet Jackson's shirt off at the Super Bowl. But I think it was the Grammys. It was the Grammys or MTV Awards or something. I forget. But Outkast did their song "Hey Ya," and they had like a green teepee, and he was wearing like green fringe. And I was sitting at the house watching it with my I was trying to think, is it my boyfriend at the time? He was Native. It was two Native guys, me, and then my roommate, who was a white girl from up the road. And as we're watching it, we're going, this is horrible. Why would they do? He didn't even bother to call some Native dancers. He's just up here doing this. This is a misrepresentation. And I was, again, my little activist heart was all upset and mad and very vocal about, this is crazy. This is not cool. And da da da. And my roommate, who I'd been roommates with for at this point like 2 years, I had the same college roommate until we were not roommates anymore, until I was not a roommate anymore. She goes, but Brittany, you're half white. Why are you upset? I said, I ain't half mad though. I was like, that part of my identity doesn't negate my Native identity too. Yeah,
I had to breathe through that one. I had to breathe through that one.
Right? It's like, but you're only half. You're only half Indian. I was like, again, I'm not half mad. I'm full mad. And it's that notion of, and she was also one of the ones, she brought me a picture of her grandma to prove that her grandma was Cherokee, because we made so many jokes about, oh yeah, sure, your grandma's Cherokee. Now, her grandma was brown in her picture, but that brown could have been from anything. Yeah, so I was just so it was like, so I'm still not Native enough. And I think a lot of our kids who get particularly if you're in an urban area and you don't have that very close access to your home community, or you're not able to go back and forth, I feel like we end up with a lot of kids who end up being like super Indians. Yeah. Oh, I'm going to be so Indian that I'm going to call out other people for not being Indian enough. And it's like, that's not Native either.
And
That's
that just goes
your identity is your identity, and you stand in that and be proud of that, but you don't have to negate anyone else's identity.
right. And you know, okay, like, sorry, this just gets my blood boiling, and
Yes.
it
It's
it's
yes.
awful
Feel
because
your feelings because they're valid.
right. No, we're not going to be Mr. Earring, you know what I mean, over there, invalidating your feelings and making excuses to be ignorant. Um, so can you hear me still? Because I had to take my headphones out. Okay, good.
Mhm.
So even as a girl, so I have Misadventures of a Res Girl, and in this, I'm going to talk about all these things and identity and all of that. We're going to get all of this. Even as a woman who grew up on the reservation, I have Native American identity issues. And when you look at me, you're like, oh, she's Native. You know what I mean? Like, you're
She,
just,
you
just
go, she's definitely not white. She's definitely
right,
not, definitely not
yeah,
black. I mean, she's not.
right. But she's brown.
She's
She's a
something,
brown girl,
something
right?
else.
Like, yeah,
Hey.
I am something else.
Continue on.
Oh, Brittany knows I'm something else sometimes.
Oh, go ahead.
So, I mean, and then that like that super Indian. So I have to give all the credit to Brittany and AIO, Americans for Indian Opportunity, for helping me realize that I'm Indigenous, whether I know how to butcher a sheep or not, right? And those are the things, like, and this is another form of invisibility that happens is our urban natives. Talk about, we have natives who are invisible, then we have urban natives who are just that much more invisible,
Mhm.
because they're in cities and sort of cut off
And
from
we're not
the
supposed to be here. We're not supposed to
right.
be in cities.
We're supposed to be out living in our green teepees, like, apparently. Uh,
Y'all go. I'm sure that performance is up somewhere. Y'all go look at it and tell me I'm wrong. I
oh,
was
you
like,
know what? I'm gonna find it and I'm gonna try and link it in our thing so that
oh,
you can look at it,
do.
because it's just,
It
and
was horrible.
but like, it's such a multifaceted thing. But for me, when I'm like, uh, that super Indianness used to really grind my gears. And you know this because it was right, but when I started at AIO, there were people I had issues with because of their super Indianness, and they tried it out, native you or out, you know, whatever. But now I'm like, oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm so sorry. I feel it too. Like, what do you got to teach me? Because it's part of that lateral oppression, that lateral, I want to out native you because I have something wrong here. There's something that hurts here. And for me, it was like, okay, well, I'm going to battle it out with you now. And I have learned through LaDonna Hare. I'm going to give these women their credit because LaDonna
Give them their
Hare,
flowers because they're still
right,
here.
they are amazing. They're still here. Still, LaDonna's still strong as heck. And that indigeneity is, we have values, and those values are so ingrained in me that I did not know that I'm Indigenous, whether wherever I'm at, whoever I'm interacting with. So now it's more like with my interactions with people, and I always never knew that that's what the reason was when I would interact with people. It's more like, okay, well then teach me. I'm here to learn from you. If you know this and you know more than me, I am an empty cup. Fill me with
Mm-hmm.
your knowledge, and giving them the validation that they're seeking
Yeah.
instead of battling it. You know what I mean? Because I recognize it now as my own insecurities, battling someone else's insecurities.
Yes. And the thing is that because the invisibility is, I mean, one of the things this invisible this is such a big topic, and it's so layered and so hurtful across the board. And the fact that we don't talk about at any level, we don't talk about the indigenous peoples who are still here. The fact that our history is not included. The history of the United States does not start with the Pilgrims, folks. It starts eons ago. It starts when the first men and first women came up from the earth. That's when our history starts, not when the Pilgrims, or Columbus, if you want to even go that route, or Vikings. It's the history of the United States is much further back than that. And because we don't teach that, and because our stories are always centered on the white story, they're always centered on the European story, specifically the Europeans that conquered or had to manifest destiny across the United States. Because that's where our history is centered, we're centering whiteness in everything. And that's not the history of this country. That's one part of the history of this country, but there is a much fuller picture. And that's all I've ever asked of anyone, is if you're going to tell the story, and because that's one of the things folks who are Columbus people say, well, that's part of our history, we should tell it. It's like, well, if you're going to tell the story, at least tell the whole story. Let's talk about the whole interaction as it happened.
Let's not sugarcoat it.
No, let's
sugarcoat it.
Because if you want to learn from the past, you need to know the whole past, not just pieces of the past that please you. Look at me with alliteration there. Yeah. And so it's so, because that invisibility is across the board at every level, it does create a little tug that happens inside of us, and does create, for a lot of us, whether we grew up at home on reses, whether we grew up in urban areas, whether we have one native parent or two, whether we're, and we won't even talk about blood quantum, because that's not invented by us. That is not how we identify ourselves as Native people. But that's, again, a conversation for another day.
And that contributes to the disappearance and invisibility of our people. So no, with blood
yes.
quantum.
So yeah, and we can have a conversation about that another day. But what I really want to get home is that because we have that, it creates this self-esteem issue, the self-image issue of, I shouldn't be here. So if I shouldn't be here, maybe I shouldn't act like I'm here. And for some folks, that manifests as, oh, I'll show you. I'm going to do everything I possibly can. Or it manifests as, well, I don't matter anyway, so I might as well engage in self-harm behaviors. Or it manifests as, I'm going to be super Indian and have all the answers. It manifests itself in these different ways. And we end up, like you just said, you said it so beautifully, insecurity fighting insecurity. And it's not the wholeness of who we are. It's that little hurt place over here with that other little hurt place. They're just fighting each other.
It's not. And then it's also, it creates a gatekeeping of our culture. Because then there's also that, well, you're not Indian enough to know these things. I mean, you're half Navajo, or you're half, or you're a quarter. Then there's our cultural gatekeepers who you don't, and it's like, then that is also contributing to our invisibility and the dying of our culture, which, I mean, we're vibrant as heck, but
we're vibrant, we're resilient. I just had a conversation with someone on the Facebooks where the point was made, we need more young people working for our tribal government. And I thought the guy I was reading wrote it. He's from my tribe. I thought he wrote it, but actually someone else wrote it. I was like, that's very right, very true. And as the thread continued, I ended up just all the things I've heard at tribal council meetings about including youth. It's like, that's a great idea, but we don't do that here. Or, you know what would really be nice? How about you come clean up the tribal grounds? Instead of this really big, beautiful idea that you have, instead of putting our information online, we don't need to put our information too much online because someone might steal it. And so we make ourselves more invisible.
Right.
And we don't engage our young people in building in demonstrating and showing our resiliency, because we're so used to being invisible. We're so comfortable being invisible that we don't want to move forward with it. So
there's also this aspect of, if I'm invisible, no one will hurt me.
Woo! Say that again. One more time in the back.
If I'm invisible, no one will hurt me.
And I have literally heard that come out of some of our tribal leaders' mouths. Not quite that way, but just that way. It's like, if we show too much, if we share too much, then people are going to hurt us. And invisibility worked in our favor, particularly on the East Coast. Invisibility worked in our favor in the sense that we were able to survive and thrive.
Right.
Invisibility is also hurting us because, and I've heard our kids say this, I've heard adults say this. In fact, someone said when I brought my husband home, who's Leech Lake Ojibwe, like, oh, you went and got you a real Indian. I'm like, I am a real Indian. He got him a real Indian.
He got him a nice real Indian girl.
I was like,
that.
He just hit the lottery over here. What are you talking about? Oh man, that's something that but that's there is this still we're not good enough. I'm like, we are at our powwow. I have brought him to my tribal grounds. What are you talking about? Anyway, but there is that notion of the real Indians over there. I'm like, half of you is the real Indians over here. What in the world?
And and the thing is with me that there's still, I mean, and this is the beautiful of our the juxtaposition of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that I am from the res. I am brown.
You are the real Indians over there.
Right. And I still don't feel like a real Indian. So like where are we gonna finally decide that we're not gonna do this comparison anymore and we're just going to teach everybody there's gonna be a fundamental foundation of cultural teachings in our schools, right? That
would be beautiful.
The beautiful thing about the revitalization in Navajo on our reservation is that I don't know about now because we're in a pandemic. Just a reminder, guys, we're still in a pandemic. First, second, and
wear
third
your mask.
Integration of Navajo. First, second, and third. Then English is taught. So there's an integration of Navajo for math, science, history, all of that.
That's so cool.
And these are pilot programs. I'm all no, these shouldn't be pilot. These just need to be.
That's super. That is super cool because when you know your language in that way, and you're able to just converse in it, you're able to sit in your values a little more, I think. Not to say that you can't, because you absolutely, whether you have your language or not, you still have your values, because that's something that never leaves us. Let me say again for you, you in the back, your values never leave you, whether you have your language or not.
Whether you're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, is Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania?
I just had this conversation. Yes.
Why did
I was like, geography?
If you're in New York, and you're Apache, you're Navajo, you're Wakamasiwan, whatever.
She says it and says it right.
Indigenous. I can't even spell it.
Ooh.
You are Indigenous wherever you're at. So don't forget that. There you go.
And guess what, guys? We are something else.
So we get our merch. Merch from some of these
Misadventures and something else.
Resilient, Indigenous, something else. Oh, okay. So before we go,
coronavirus.
Excuse me.
Good thing we're in two different studios.
Who trips over her own feet and chokes on her own self. Before we go, the native humor that's coming out of this, I love. Oh my gosh, you have something that's gonna. I love our it's a trauma response. My humor sometimes is a trauma response.
Yes.
And we're like, okay, you're gonna call us something else. We're gonna own this. We're gonna put it on T-shirts. We're gonna put it on mugs. We're gonna put it on beadwork. Like, call us something. You know what I mean? You tell me what.
Uh, so yes, happy something else month, Heritage Month.
Thank you.
Yeah. The go if you haven't done it, folks. Go look up the hashtag something else. Twitter is hilarious. The memes were hilarious. Facebook hashtag something else. Go look for it. It was just off the natives are off the chain.
They're hilarious.
You're just off the chain. It's
That's
just
a good
something
one.
else. That's all I can say.
One of my favorite ones is it shows the CNN thing, and then where it says something else, it's all something deadly. And I was
Hey.
like, hey, what's up?
Oh man. So thank you guys so much for coming and joining us. If you like what you hear, please comment below. Tell us, give us a thumbs up below. If you've seen a meme, share one of those memes below. We would love to see. I don't think we've seen them all, and we need to see them all. We need to collect them all and create a something else book. Like, comment, subscribe. Also, check us out individually on our platforms. You have Exo Honeybee Marie right here. And then it's Brittany Shulman. Check it out. We're happy to have you on board. And I hope you'll come back for more of our misadventures and our misadventure talks.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.